page 162 in the Kuzari. I'm just going to do a few lines today because I wanted to have a discussion with you as it relates to Hanukkah. Just a very brief observation. Where we were in the Kuzari is in the middle of a discussion about the holiness of Eretz Yisrael. It's a special status to the land of Israel that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has established, that it's the only place in the world where a Jew can attain spiritual perfection. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi defines spiritual perfection as nevuah, as prophecy, being able to have this conjunction with Hashem. And so, in paragraph 12, come on in. So, I'll go the other way. Okay. So, in paragraph 12, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi tries to, in some way, frame the discussion of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets with the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. There's a certain kind of philosophical discussion that is very much in vogue in this period of time and place in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's worldview, where it becomes incumbent to try and present a philosophical depiction of what is happening on a metaphysical plane when we say that Hashem and the Jewish people come together in a certain place. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi tries to explain this in paragraph 12. He says, moreover, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which dwelled in Eretz Yisrael, aided them in their prophecy. It was as if the divinity was seeking, we're again, page 162, paragraph 12. It was as if the divinity was seeking to be God to someone, such as the prophets and saintly individuals, who was worthy of cleaving to him. This is similar to the philosopher's description of the active intellect, which seeks out someone whose nature is complete and whose soul and attributes are prepared to receive complete wisdom. Now, here he's making reference to the philosophers. Which philosophers is he referring to? He's referring to the philosophers of his own day, the Arabic philosophers who used an Aristotelian worldview in their philosophical discussions. And that's where we got into this. So we get this terminology called the Seichel HaPoel, the active intellect. What is the active intellect? We've discussed it before. It's a complicated topic. But the active intellect is some kind of manifestation of God, which the Greeks call the prime mover, that man is capable of tapping into. But the way that Aristotle and his Arabic interpreters understood this active intellect entity is that it's almost like a radio tower emitting waves of divinity. Okay? And you need to have the proper radio in order to be able to pick up that frequency. And how do you develop that? How do you get that radio? You have to have a perfected intellect. If your mind is attuned to those radio waves of the active intellect, so then you're capable of hooking up and plugging into, so to speak, that divine message. And so therefore, even though the philosophers talk about God in a very detached fashion, they say that God is above emotion, and they say that God is not even aware of what's going on in this world. But there's this constant transmission of divinity that emanates from this prime mover, works its way down to the active intellect or active intelligence, which is man's connection to that ultimate force, that ultimate creative force. And it's not that different, he says, in our description of the way Hashem was seeking to have some kind of connection to worthy creations in Eretz Yisrael. So he sets up the transmission tower, the radio tower to the transmission for prophecy in Eretz Yisrael. In order to be able to hook up with those radio waves, you have to be in the land of Israel in order to be able to receive that transmission. If you're outside of Eretz Yisrael, the transmission tower does not go beyond the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Similarly, the soul seeks out a physical being whose natural endowments have reached completeness and is therefore ready to attain the heightened experience of coming to life. In other words, there is this natural order within physics that works on the same level. When a fetus reaches the proper level of gestation and forms into physically a human being, the soul is ready to connect itself to that fetus. It's the same way that when a person achieves a certain level of gestation intellectually, spiritually, he's ready to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's by analogy, and he's basically saying that it's almost an automatic process. And the reason why I say that it's almost an automatic process is because, as the Rambam writes in the Moreh Nevuchim, that's one of the main differences between Aristotle and Judaism. Aristotle believed that as long as you perfected your intellect to a certain level, then it didn't matter your level of piety, and there was no such thing as divine will, but automatically you plug into the active intellect and you are able to receive sort of like divine messages and divine inspiration. For the Rambam, and presumably for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as well, who's even less philosophically oriented than the Rambam, you really have to be worthy and be deemed worthy by Hashem to receive that divine communication. It's not something that happens automatically, but it's almost automatic. In other words, there are certain conditions that need to be satisfied in order to be able to connect, and then Hashem has to decide whether you're worthy or not. That's what he's saying. And similarly, the life force within plants which causes them to grow seeks a physical object with the right physical makeup to become a growing, living plant. There is a science to it, and as long as you conform to the scientific parameters of prophecy, you will become a prophet, provided that Hashem shows his grace to you and is willing to allow this conjunction to take place. But what we have to do is we have to conform to the scientific requirements of prophecy, which is we have to develop our intellect, we have to do the mitzvot, we have to come to Eretz Yisrael, we have to establish a temple where the divine presence can come down. And if all of those things are satisfied and HaKadosh Baruch Hu deems us worthy, then we'll be able to receive prophecy. If we are worthy of receiving prophecy, but we have not conformed to the scientific parameters of what you need in order to attain prophecy, then no matter how worthy and no matter how much we will try to be prophets, we will not succeed. That's really Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's point. The reason why he feels that it is important to engage in this discussion is once again because he's trying to emphasize the centrality of Eretz Yisrael. That as much as a Jew thinks that he can achieve perfection in Chutz La'aretz, it's simply not possible. It's scientifically impossible, is really what he's trying to describe over here. No matter how high you may aspire towards greatness, you will always fall short of the apex of greatness if you continue to live in Chutz La'aretz. That for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is an absolute. Now, as we are discussing the active intellect and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's philosophical analogies, I just thought it was interesting perhaps to add a postscript to this holiday of Hanukkah. Because Hanukkah is the victory of the Jewish people over Hellenism and the attempt to subvert Judaism and make it more of a Greek system with Greek worldviews and Greek ideology. And the truth of the matter is that when you look at a text like this from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, you sort of have to ask yourself the question, did the Hasmoneans really win? Because after all, here we have one of the greatest Jewish thinkers who has ever lived, certainly in the medieval period, and he is borrowing liberally from Greek ideas and Greek philosophy in order to explain Jewish concepts. And when you look at the Rambam, he does so even more, because he has a whole book called the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, which is replete with an acknowledgement to the greatness of Aristotle and to the Greek philosophical system, with some exceptions. And so then the question becomes, did the Hasmoneans really win? Was there truly a victory over the Greeks? Or did we, in some way, lose by being indoctrinated and absorbing some of these Greek ideas and ideologies and making them part of Judaism. Please.
What's the question? Chachma b'gayim tamin.
What is the question? Chachma b'umos tamin. But we're not just dealing with Chachma here, we're dealing with Torah. And we're interpreting Torah through a Greek philosophical lens. So what's the difference between Chachma and Torah in your mind? Because the Gemara says, Torah b'umos al tamin, but Chachma b'umos tamin. Yes? So what's the difference between the two?
You can use knowledge that's outside of the Jewish world, but not accept their theology.
So their philosophy, yes, but not their theology. Their religious thought, you have to reject. If their religious thought is in conflict with the Torah, you have to reject that. But if they have, let's say, tools that you can use to help you understand Jewish ideas.
Right, that's what I mean.
That's what you mean, right? Exactly. So, but if they have tools that you can use to interpret authentically Jewish ideas, and you can use a nomenclature of the Greeks, you can use a systematology of the Greeks, then that's perfectly legitimate. And as a matter of fact, that's the way some Meforshim learn, which is why you're allowed to write Sefer Torah in only one of two languages. It can only be written in Hebrew, or it can be written in Greek. This is what the Mishnah states. And the way that the Meforshim understand it is because there is a certain beauty and a certain intrinsic value to Greek Chachma, as Mrs. Sochachevsky is pointing out. Yes?
What do you mean with Jewish ideas?
Well, what do we mean? We mean anything having to do with the Torah. Principles of our faith. Ideas having to do with of the Torah coming from Har Sinai. Ideas about God. So we believe in one God. But in helping us trying to understand God and and fine-tuning our understanding of God, we can sometimes use a Greek terminologies of, we know that Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But what is Echad? What does oneness mean? So if you look into some of the Arabic philosophers who borrowed very liberally from Aristotle, unity in Islam is very important. It's probably even more important, if I can even say such a thing. Unity in Islam is even more focused upon than it is in Judaism. So if we want to look for the definition of unity, and especially when we look at the Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, we notice that he utilizes a nomenclature that is very much rooted in the philosophy of his time that comes from outside of Judaism. There's nothing wrong with that. For the Rambam and for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, there's nothing wrong with that as long as we use it as a tool to help us understand ideas that are found in the Torah. And it's very important to keep this in mind. I think it's very important to keep this in mind because there really are two differing attitudes in the world of Jewish thought, which is very broad, to secular knowledge and the utilization of Chachma, right, of Chachma B'umos, of secular wisdom, as a tool to helping us understand Torah. There are those who would say that one is obligated to eschew and reject this foreign system entirely. Any type of system of knowledge which is outside of Torah is going to be not useful or helpful in helping us being able to become greater Torah scholars. If anything, it would only help to corrupt our thinking because it is a foreign system. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to think a certain way, and therefore we should only focus on the traditional Torah texts and view them through the same prism that our Chazal viewed them, and regardless of how mankind evolves in the thinking process and in the nomenclatures that are used within modern society, we have to reject that and only use the terminologies and the thought processes and the intellectual tools that are at the disposal of Chazal and the Tanakh. And that is a legitimate worldview. But it is not a worldview that is shared by the Rambam, and it's not a worldview that is shared by even Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who's much more of a purist when it comes to Jewish thought than the Rambam is. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is very critical of the study of Greek philosophy in a number of places. But even he, as you see very clearly from this paragraph, is very much in favor of utilizing the conventional knowledge of his time in helping us to understand Jewish concepts that are found in the Torah. When you look at the way that the Rambam discusses the story of Hanukkah, you'll be very you'll note it's very overt. For the Rambam, Hanukkah was not about the ideological struggle against the Greeks, because for the Rambam, the ideological struggle is not something that we necessarily need to concern ourselves with, because for the Rambam, when the Jews find themselves in the diaspora in a certain setting, in a certain Weltanschauung, if I can use Rav Soloveitchik's word, right? When we find ourselves in a certain kind of milieu, an intellectual milieu, there's a purpose. You know, as we have to believe in this idea of determinism, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what he's doing. If he sent the Jews to Spain, then he wanted the Jews to be able to glean certain benefits from being part of a Spanish society. And the way that the Mekubalim discuss it is the idea of harvesting the klipos, harvesting the nitzotzos from the klipos, gathering the sparks of holiness that are in Spain in the 12th century and bringing them out into the fore so that the Jewish people can benefit from those sparks and help use those sparks to help us enhance our understanding of Torah. And so it really does it really requires a person to have this very, very broad and accepting view of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine plan. It's not that, we were kicked out of this country and we ended up in that country. It's that HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated the entire history of the Jewish people. We were kicked out of Eretz Yisrael and then we were sent to Bavel. Bavel had certain benefits that we needed to glean. Then God arranged for the Greeks to take over the Middle East because there were certain ideological and cultural things that we needed to take from them as well. And then to Rome and so forth. And then we go to the individual countries. We're kicked out of the Middle East, then we end up in Spain, and then we end up in Germany, and then we end up in the Rhineland, then we end up in England, and then we end up in Poland and in Eastern Europe. And then we end up going to the Western Hemisphere. So all of the tiltulim, all of the migrations of the Jewish people are for a reason. And the reason is known only to the divine, but what we can at least affirm to ourselves is that Klal Yisrael ended up in Canada for a reason. That there was a certain segment, the frozen chosen, right? There was a certain need for a segment of the Jewish population to end up here in order to be able to glean whatever sparks of holiness exist in this land that are unique to this particular region. And once we've completed our task of gleaning those sparks, of drawing whatever we need to, and integrating that within the Jewish nation, it'll be time to migrate back to Eretz Yisrael to be able to bring the final redemption. So, for the Rambam, therefore, when he talks about the reason for our observance of Hanukkah, and I just photocopied the first 3 halachas of Hilchas Hanukkah for you in the Rambam. He does not talk about the ideological struggle with Greece. That's not what Hanukkah is all about. The reason why we celebrate Hanukkah is because ubitlu datam gazru keshemalchu Yavan gezerot al Yisrael ubitlu datam velo inichu osam lasok b'Torah uvemitzvos. This was the oppressive nature of the Greeks. It wasn't a subtle oppression. It was quite overt and harsh. They forced us to stop observing mitzvahs. They forced us to stop studying Torah. Upashtu yadam b'mamonam uvivnosehem. And they violated us both financially and violated our families, our daughters. And that's why it was necessary to go to war against them. It does not say in the Rambam that there was an ideological threat coming from Greece because they were introducing us to foreign ideas like, like rules of geometric rules of what the hypotenuse equals the two sides of an isosceles triangle, or that we learned about geometry or physics and metaphysics. That is not the threat. The threat is that when they try to replace our Torah with their system. But if they wanted to introduce us to that system and allow us to keep our Torah system alongside it, for the Rambam, not only is there nothing wrong with that, but the Torah is actually enhanced by that tandem system, because we can actually now interpret Torah on an even deeper level using the systematology of the Greek scholars. Okay? So keep that in mind when someone who is a purist tries to suggest that secular knowledge is an evil thing. Secular knowledge is only evil if it seeks to supplant one's Torah ideology and observance. But secular knowledge, qua secular knowledge, is not an evil thing. It can actually be a wonderful thing if it's used properly as a tool to help us understand Torah. So if a young man or woman wants to study science, if they want to study even philosophy, or if they want to study the arts, and as a way of helping them enhance their knowledge of Torah, so then this, for the Rambam and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, is potentially a virtuous thing. Now understand, of course, that there's the danger. The danger, of course, is that you may get so sucked into that system that you won't be able to find a way of making them compatible. And you may get so sucked into science that it'll become your own a religion unto itself. And that's of course an error that many scientists have fallen prey to, because it's not by coincidence that a disproportionate amount of scientists are atheists. It's because the system itself has a certain allure to pull you away from it, from religious belief, because it seeks to provide answers that religion is purported to be able to provide. So if you have answers in science, then who needs religion anymore, right? So you have to make sure that that's not going to happen. So that's why we have to fortify our children when they're at a tender age with a sufficient dosage of Torah and a worldview that is completely saturated in Torah before we send them out to the university to be able to learn about other modes of knowledge. Yes?
I think also it's a little bit of a slippery slope, because when you talk about being open to science, that's one thing, but you have to differentiate that from popular culture, because popular culture is garbage. And that's, I think, what makes people move away from Torah. So people hear things...
I don't know if I would go so... I'm not sure if everyone would agree that popular culture is garbage. There are a lot of things that are garbagey about popular culture, but I don't think you should throw out the baby with the bathwater. Is there no redeeming value to popular culture?
Very little. And a lot of it is evil, violent, very evil. And I think that's the danger. I never heard of anyone going off the derech because they majored in math or science. But, people who are very steeped in popular culture, I think it's a bad thing. That's just my opinion. And I've heard people use this argument of Chachma ba'unos tamin to justify wanting to be part of the whole popular culture of the world. And I don't feel that's legitimate.
I hear you. Anyone want to offer a counterpoint? Or is everyone... Yes.
I don't want to offer a counterpoint, I just want to offer a comment that there were a lot of aspects of Greek culture that were antithetical to Judaism. Like they were pagan culture, they worshipped the human body, they were hedonistic culture.
Yes.
And so a lot of Jews were getting sucked into all of this as well during the time of Hashmonaim. So it wasn't just the philosophical aspect, it was a whole lifestyle that was completely antithetical to the Jewish way of life. Good.
Right. So you're actually what you're saying is supportive of what Mrs. Sochachevsky is saying.
No, I'm just saying what the Rambam is saying. It's not just that they didn't let us keep the Torah, well, sort of, there's a lot of things in their culture. Well, the actual paganism is Avodah Zarah. They worship.
Yes, but that's my very point. You notice the Rambam's emphasis is not on the assimilative quality of Greek society. He does not mention that as the reason for celebrating Hanukkah, that we broke away from the Hellenization of the Greeks. While what you're suggesting is absolutely historically accurate, that's not the Rambam's focus. And I'm just making a suggestion that the reason why the Rambam does not make it his focus is because he's ambivalent about the introduction of Greek culture into Judaism. He clearly acknowledges the dangers and the garbage part of it. But I don't think he wants to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I think that, for example, there are many people in the frum world who are very artistically inclined. And when it comes to the world of art, you can't say that art ends at the 18th century. So I'm only going to, if you're going to be an art student, you're sort of forced to submerge yourself in, for better or for worse, in the world of art from the ancient times to modern times, and learn from artists. Also, part of the culture of the world today is the whole mental health society, which is not purely medicine, but also involves a lot of the humanities as well. And so you're right, it's a slippery slope, but it's very thorny. You can't make a very clean break between math and science on the one hand and the humanities on the other hand. There are certain areas which intersect, and if a person is drawn to the humanities, if a person is musical or artistic in some other way, I don't think that we can necessarily say that because the majority of the pop culture is garbage, we have to turn that part off of that person. I just read, I don't know if you saw the article that I put out in last Friday's email, but you almost hear the angst of a person who's a Baal Tshuva writing this blog, who says that he became a Baal Tshuva at a time when it was very hip to be a Baal Tshuva, in the 70s, right? And he did it, and people that he knows who became Baalei Tshuva did it because it was a way of expressing your individuality. And this was a way of being counterculture, as it were. And today he feels that he's been frum for now the majority of his life, and now he doesn't feel that he has an avenue of expressing his individuality anymore. He's lost that sense of being an individual, of being able to express himself or herself. One of the things that we have to try and provide for people who are frum and want to be able to express themselves artistically is to be able to give them an outlet and not suppress it by saying, well, you can't, all of pop culture is garbage, or the majority of it is, and therefore, we're going to deny you. Look at, read Chaim Patuk, My Name is Asher Leif, right? So that's the whole conflict, the whole tension that exists, if you will, and it's only become worse and worse as the values of the parent culture become more and more antithetical to Judaism in so many different ways. But at the same time, I do believe that there are ways for us to be able to set up semi-permeable membranes that are healthy, that allow our children who have this need for artistic expression, not just scientific and mathematical proficiency, but need to be able to express themselves artistically. There are ways to be able to set it up, and there need to be better systems that we can set up so that children don't have to feel that they have to choose one over the other. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's not an easy thing in execution. I'm not saying that it's a piece of cake. It's a very difficult thing to do. But look, one of the things I mentioned the other day is that here's an example of how we have taken the Greek system of theater and made it into something beautiful. Have you ever heard of a Beis Yaakov that doesn't have a production, a theater production with girls doing musicals and acting and and dancing and art and all these other things. Where do you think that comes from? That's from ancient Greek theater, right? That didn't, I don't know of any stories in Tanakh where there was people were doing Shakespeare, These things, and nor does it come from Chazal, but these things were things that we absorbed from our parent culture to be able to enhance our ability to express ourselves artistically, what's inside of our neshama, to get out in some way that we can send a message in through poetry and through art and through dance and through song, all of these other ways. Right? David HaMelech was very artistic, and he had a method of expression, and so to say that we're only confined in expressing ourselves in a psalm-like fashion, I don't think it's not the way that it is, not necessarily what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants. Unless, if you disagree, I want to hear about it, because maybe I am wrong, Patricia.
I don't disagree, but this is a bit of a sidebar. But I do wish that a lot of popular Jewish culture was more artistic. If you pick up some of the books that are written for children, they're full of midos. I think of one book that I smile every time I think of the title, The Bad Midos Pirates. I never gave it to my grandchildren because I was afraid it would inspire them to bad midos because they want to be like a pirate. But a lot of the Jewish literature for children, and I'm very concerned about this right now because I have grandchildren who are reading more and more, and more advanced books, is really badly written. A lot of the popular music that you hear is terrible because it tries to copy the musical forms of pop culture music. And, there are some of the liturgical music is just boring. And there are alternatives. For example, the Torornto Women's Jewish Choir, I don't know the correct name for it. But
I didn't even know it existed, I'm sorry.
And it only performs for women.
Hence my ignorance.
But they have some wonderful liturgical pieces that were written by an Italian Jewish composer of the Renaissance. And it's gorgeous stuff. And this doesn't have to be sung only by women. So that's my problem.
I think your point is well taken. Well, one of the problems that we have is that the writers that we have in the I shouldn't generalize because this is something that I'm not largely familiar with is children's literature in the Feldheim and Art Scroll world. I haven't really read a children's book from one of those publishers in a long time, but the literary skills of their writers probably is limited based upon their own education, which probably did not advance past the high school level. I could be mistaken. It could be that they have, English PhDs writing for them. But I'm just saying, in other words, it wouldn't be surprising if that were the case because of the limitations that are placed upon Jewish in secular education.